we get our first match, and it's very WCW. I mean, once again, clash of styles, two guys. It's like, what? When you have Curt Hennig, the stripped down Mr. Perfect. I mean, it's just Curt Hennig back to AWA days against the masked pit fighter / video game character Mortis with the future Sinister Minister, Father James Mitchell, Mr. James Vendenberg. Yeah, the randomness factor of WCW strikes again. This is good stuff.
Yeah, my first thing was they couldn't get Mr. Perfect any better music. Some Curt Hennig, Mr. Perfect-esque music. It was very generic. I was like, wow, they just threw him out there. Didn't even try to, talk about anything being perfect at all. So, yeah, that was kind of odd.
There were probably more signs in the crowd referencing Mr. Perfect than they did on TV.
Yeah, I don't know if you caught during this, like somebody holds up an originality for life sign and security actually comes over and like either tells them to put it down or takes it away. Like in the front row, I was thinking originality is something we can't talk about on front row on Nitro. I'm wondering, interesting thing that caught my eye with all the signs.
Yeah, there was like a kayfabe for life or kayfabe forever or something signed as well, but that one survived because I guess security guys probably didn't get
Maybe
it.
Maybe like the neon colors that messed with the production.
Maybe so, blended in with Mortis's gear. But the interaction between Hennig and Vandenberg, your classic kind of wrestler against manager type stuff, was actually really over. The crowd was into it. They were ready for a match. I mean, the Palace there was rocking. And like you said, I mean, it was from the opening pyros to this. I mean, they were ready to go. The match was, going good. They were really hyping up Mortis's pit fighting, which like I roll, right? But I love Chris Kanyon. I mean, he's great. He was an awesome wrestler, left the world way too soon. He was, the Mortis character was great. I was always a big fan of him in Wrath. I know I was one of like 7 people in the world that were, but it was good stuff. The match is fine. It's like, it's kind of cruising along and then it hits that like 3 or 4 minute mark. It's like, okay, let's take it home. And we get the perfect plex for the win. Curt Hennig, pretty straightforward, getting Curt over. Mortis didn't look bad or anything, but your classic Nitro sub 5 minute match where the guy that needs to go over does go over.
Yeah, it stood out that Mr. Perfect, Curt Hennig, just hit his perfect flex, and it just, that's the finish, and that's it. That brought me back to the days of a finisher meaning something again, hitting it out of the blue, and that was it. And Mortis looked like $1 million, like I said, just coming to the ring and getting a little insight from Eric Bischoff again. That's why I love listening to 83 Weeks. Great podcast, great insight onto some of these things. But his whole idea for the Mortis, Wrath, Glacier, I mean, his vision for that really was something that could have worked, I think. He's mentioned how Mortal Kombat was such a big thing back then, and he saw, these guys as Mortal Kombat characters. I think that could have been a little side, thing going on, an alternate universe, so to speak, if they had kept it together, maybe put it together a little better. I think when they were running the Blood Runs Cold promos for Glacier and nobody knew what that meant. This is at the same time when Scott Hall was becoming a free agent. Nobody knew if it had something to do with him, maybe. It wasn't really clear about these other guys who may be coming in, but it ended up being Glacier. But the way he saw this alternative universe with Glacier and these guys, I think they could have done it. I mean, it was in WWE, and Russo, of all people, had been writing it. He gets a lot of shit. But he was able to write some interesting stuff for guys like Gangrel, who were doing the alternate universe thing, the vampire, and Edge was like a vampire hunter at one point who had hunted him to this universe and whatnot, just crazy stuff like that. But if they had kept Mortis and Glacier and those guys in their separate own little way and booked it a little better and kept that story, they looked great. They could have possibly really done something with it.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because the logical thing is, oh yeah, it could have been a video. These guys could have led a video game, franchise, right? And then the main characters could have been your Glaciers and your Mortises and your Wraths and maybe your Ernest the Cat Millers. But what I actually always thought, or looking back, I even think more now could have actually worked. What if they could have taken those characters, even with James Vendenberg, I think he would have been essential here, and done some sort of, at the time, it was still huge, kind of a Super Sentai, Henshin, Tokusatsu, Power Rangers type show, like totally outside of wrestling world, but just with those characters and their fighting prowess. You don't have to question it because they have the wrestler times. Like, oh, it's like the wrestler guys, but have them fight the giant rubber suited monsters. I think it could have worked as a secondary to the Power Rangers, VR Troopers, all those guys of that era. I don't know. I think it could have done something, especially in the mid late 90s. That stuff was still rocking and rolling across the globe. So I don't know. I thought that would have been a different thing outside of just the logical video game extension.
Yeah, I mean, he was looking more, I think, at the merchandising and sort of thing, as, you know, selling toys and whatnot based on these guys. But just any kind of story, if they wanted to include it in wrestling, you know, they could have said these guys were, you know, martial arts fighters from other countries and needed a new platform to continue their feuds, and just made a whole story around that sort of thing. But I think by this point they had already gotten away from it and mixed it with just the regular wrestling too much.